webinar now. People can join, and it's that kind of a conversation where you can join at any point. So good afternoon, welcome. This week is Feeding Tube Awareness Week, and it seemed a perfect time to invite some longtime people who've had a feeding tube for a long time to join us. So today we're going to have Getting Comfortable with a Feeding Tube with Luke Bosing and Natalie and Mary Wooten. We'll be joined today by Nancy Pickett as well, who's orchestrated a fabulous social media campaign for us this week during Feeding Tube Awareness Week to help increase the general understanding of tube feeding. I hope you've seen some of the Facebook posts, Instagram and Twitter posts that Nancy has created.
Brother, sister?
No, they both have one.
I know.
If everybody could keep your microphones on mute, that would be a really big help. So today, Nancy will help us lead the discussion with Luke, Natalie, and Mary. So before we begin, a few things about the webinar and Zoom. I want everybody to make sure you're aware that this session is being recorded and will be available later on Oley's YouTube page. Please take note of how your name appears in Zoom and consider changing or deleting it if you want greater privacy. How, you ask? At the bottom center of your screen, you will see a participants icon. If you click on that, then hover over your name, you should see a more button next to your name, and you'll have the option to change your name, change how your name appears. Please also mute your microphone for the duration of the webinar to avoid any background noise. We'll take questions throughout the session, so please type your questions into the chat box. The chat function should be at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be watching for questions, trying to integrate them into the conversation or answer them at the end in a question and answer session. That depends on the time we have and how the general conversation is going. So to turn to our guests, today I'd like to thank Luke, Natalie, Mary, and Nancy for joining us. Very briefly, Luke has had a feeding tube since he was 9 after an automobile accident. He is now married with 2 children, and he works at Nationwide Children's Hospital. Natalie, who's joining us with her mom, has had a feeding tube since she was a baby, and she'll be 13 next month. And as I said, she's joining us with Mary, her mom, who's also on the Oley staff with us. And Nancy has been on tube feeding and or IV nutrition since she was struck with debilitating symptoms in her sophomore year of high school. Nancy is now a film student and, as I mentioned, has been helping us tremendously with outreach this week. So if we could begin, everybody will have an opportunity to tell a little bit more about yourselves, and then Nancy will begin asking some questions and getting the conversation started. So Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name's Nancy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an Oley member and an HPN consumer. And I was lucky enough to receive the Kyle Noble Memorial Scholarship this year, which is helping me continue my study of journalism at the University of Florida. And like Lisa said, I've spent the whole week creating content for Oley social media about Feeding Tube Awareness Week for general education. And now I'm so excited to be here to interview Luke, Mary, and Natalie about their experience getting comfortable with a feeding tube.
And Luke, you want to go next?
Sure. So as Lisa said, my name is Luke Bosing. I'm married with 2 young boys, Sawyer and Cooper. They are 7 and 4. I've had a feeding tube since I was about 9 years old, and I'm about 33 now. So I've had quite a few years with them. In that, I am a nurse as well. And I actually used to teach families how to go home with G-tubes, trachs, central lines, those sorts of things. So very excited to be with you all today. And I'm pretty open about anything and everything. So don't be afraid to ask questions.
And Natalie and Mary, tell us, Natalie, you want to start? Want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Natalie. I have a G-tube I've had it since I was 16 months old because I have gastroparesis. I have two younger brothers, Oliver and Quinn. I'm in 7th grade.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Natalie's mom, Mary. And I am an Oley ambassador and on the Oley staff as a program associate. I'm also the volunteer New York State ambassador with the Rare Action Network for National Organization for Rare Disorders. Although Natalie's had her feeding tube for about 12 years now, I'm still learning more about it every day. And it's just a joy to really see her growing up stronger because of her tube and just working with our community. So thank you for inviting us to speak today.
Thank you all for being here. And Nancy, you want to get us started?
Yeah, so I know one thing I really struggled with when I got my first feeding tube was just all the different ways that it changed my life, because food is such a huge part of all of our social interactions. So I want to know, how has tube feeding changed your life, and what kind of adjustments did you have to make to live with your feeding tube?
So I can start with that. Tube feeding really did change my life in a number of ways. Nancy, as you kind of said, our social fabric structure really kind of revolves around food. When you think of all the holidays, there's usually a meal associated with every holiday. And so that was difficult for me. But I think the biggest thing or the thing that helped the most was still participating in those events. Just because I necessarily couldn't eat what everybody else was eating, just being there and being able to be part of that was a godsend to me. I traditionally have used more nighttime feedings really than daytime feedings. A little background, I'm short bowel syndrome, so I don't absorb what I eat. So I need supplemental feeding, so I can eat both orally and I take feeds through the G-tube. But I still have to watch what I eat orally, especially high fats, high sugars, those sorts of things. So we had to modify quite a few things when I was a child in order to keep my nutrition up and to keep like nausea away. I had to get special permission at school to be able to like carry snacks with me throughout the day. It really kind of made me feel different than everybody else. But at the same time, I don't know. It was challenging, but it made me who I am today, and I think we'll probably touch on that a little bit more later.
Nancy, do you want us to answer that one next?
Yeah, if you have an answer.
Okay.
I don't really know a life without a feeding tube, so I don't know how to answer this, so my mom's going to.
Okay, so Natalie got her feeding tube when she was 16 months old. Before she got her tube, she really struggled with any sort of nutrition to hold it down. Her nails wouldn't grow. Her skin was really pale and almost translucent. Her hair, when it grew, it kind of broke and just wasn't healthy looking. And she really didn't have a lot of energy. She was really a miserable toddler. When she got her feeding tube and we got her into a schedule of feeding that she was able to tolerate, she really just kind of grew into herself. She became a happier child. She was able to enjoy her play groups and have more energy to play and really just be happy. Her hair started to grow and look healthy. Her nails started to grow. She started to develop color in her skin and a rosy glow to her cheeks and develop more of the olive tone to her skin that I think should have been there all along. And just really became almost a whole nother child. It was really amazing to watch and see that change in her. And as she grew older, the tube feeding really gave her the energy that she needed to pursue the sports and the different activities that she wanted to pursue, such as ballet and gymnastics, soccer, etc. So, yeah.
So I think I can kind of add to that a little bit as well. So I did go through a period in college to where I was able to maintain my weight without the use of a feeding tube. And I did that for several years until finally my tube was actually removed. Once it was removed though, I did again start having trouble gaining weight, and not only that, but maintaining my weight. So my weight did a steady kind of slow decline. And I can echo some of the things that you just said. I didn't feel like myself. My energy level was low. But for me, it was more of like an independence thing. Like I felt like I had to almost prove something to myself that I could live without this. And that was, kind of a hurdle that I had to get over. And eventually, I weigh about 175 pounds now. I got down to about 135 at my lowest. So I was very, very thin. And my doctor, basically said it's time, like we need to go back to a feeding tube. And I really had a hard time accepting that because part of me felt that I failed, I couldn't do it without it. But I will say that honestly has probably been one of the better decisions that I've made, because once I got my tube back, I restarted my feeds, my weight went back up, my energy level went back up. I felt more like myself, and I was able to participate in a lot more of those things that I would normally do. So challenging, but at the same time, I would say life-giving, honestly.
We had the failure feeling before the feeding tube was placed. Natalie was in feeding therapy, and we were like, just give us one more month, just give us one more week, just give us one more feeding session to get her to eat, to get her to take something by mouth before we do the feeding tube. And it just unfortunately didn't work. So it did feel like a failure, but we knew that she needed it. And it wasn't until afterwards where we were like, why did we wait so long? What were we waiting for? Why didn't we not do this sooner? So yeah.
I definitely think that that's something we've heard a lot, especially as we've gone through Feeding Tube Awareness Week, that something really common with a lot of our members is saying that the only thing that they wish they had done differently is that they wish that they would have gotten their tube sooner. But I think that there's a lot of very reasonable fears that come with getting a feeding tube. And one of the things that I've heard a lot from people is that they feel self-conscious about their feeding tubes, whether they have a nasal tube or one that's in their stomach. They feel weird about showing it to people and telling people about it. So how did a feeding tube affect your self-confidence?
So my feeding tube got placed when I was 9 years old. So I did have some time before actually having a feeding tube. So I do remember what that was like. When I got my feeding tube, especially being at that younger age, I was definitely self-conscious about it. I would say that self-conscious only escalated as I kind of went through my teenage / young adult years. You worry about things such as dating and talking to other people, and who's going to know, who needs to know about my feeding tube. And that was really a challenge for me. I will say that one of the better things that I have done, honestly, is just to be open about it with folks. When I initially got my tube, I went to a very small school with about, I'd say, 35 to 40 people in my class. I actually just got it all out at once. I got up in front of the class, told everyone that I had a feeding tube and what it was like. They asked questions about it. But that helped because then it was almost all over. I didn't have to have that same conversation 40 times over and over again with my classmates. So that was something that my mom, I guess, kind of pushed me to do. But in hindsight, that was the right thing to do. And honestly, my class kind of rallied around me, and they supported me, and they knew that's why I had to have snacks during the day, and I guess use a special restroom, and those sorts of things. And but it was still hard. It was still hard to do. As I got older and became a teenager, again, I was more self-conscious of it. So we talk about like swimming and doing those sorts of fun things that we do. And I would always wear a shirt every time I went swimming. It wasn't necessarily so much the questions or the looks that you get from people. It was the kids just coming up and saying, "What is that?" And then I'd have to go through the story over and over and over again. I got really tired of telling that same story. So I could just put a shirt on and then I didn't have to tell the story anymore. But as I grew up and became an adult, there wasn't one, I guess, instance that had a light bulb moment, but I did slowly come to the realization that, everybody has something, right? Everybody's got some sort of concern, some sort of health issue, something they are insecure about that has to deal with themselves. And once I realized that and kind of processed that, I'm not so different than everybody else just because I have a feeding tube. And that kind of normalized it for me and made it more tolerable.
Go ahead. So, kind of like what Luke said, like wanting to just not have it seem so that kids don't constantly come up to you and be like, "Hey, what is that? What does it do? Why do you have that?" And because they don't really know. So that also happened in school a lot, especially in elementary. Like I'd go to the bathroom and then another girl would come and she'd be like, "Hey, what is that? Like, why do you have that? Why are you wearing a backpack at school during the day?" So it was kind of like you just didn't want people to ask you that because you didn't want to have to go through your whole entire story. And I remember last year in 6th grade, there was this kid in my class, Jaden, I think his name was, and he made a joke at the end of the day, and my pump beat. And he said, "Oh, looks like the Hot Pockets are done." It was really funny. I don't know why, but it was really funny. I laughed so hard. It's one of those things where there's a difference between kids asking you stuff or making fun of you and kids actually making a joke. So there are times where like you just don't want people to know about it. There are also times where you can't help that they know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And like when we go places like Maryland or something, I used to like want to wear a one-piece bathing suit all the time so that like no one would see it. And now like I go to Maryland with my friend and like I'll just wear my bikini and like I'll just walk along the beach. And it's kind of fun because you don't care anymore. But at the same time, you don't want people to ask you questions.
Mm-hmm. I've told Natalie just to think of it as, a lot of the older girls have belly button piercings. She just kind of has like the ultimate belly piercing ever.
You can put a big old diamond on that thing, right?
Yep.
Dazzle it.
That's right. That's right.
Yep. And Natalie does have a 504 plan at school, which does say that she can eat or drink at any point if because she can eat orally if she needs to help with nausea or to help with her calories. And even though the children aren't allowed to have backpacks, she is allowed to carry her backpack on. She is allowed to carry a water bottle with her at all times, because she's not allowed, not allowed to use the water fountains, which I know COVID now, the kids aren't allowed to anyways, but before that, she wasn't allowed to. So they have made accommodations for her, and they've been really helpful with that. Yeah, anything else you want to add about school?
No, I don't think.
Okay. Oh, and schools, the schools have been really, really accommodating as far as Feeding Tube Awareness Week has gone, with the exception this year, Nellie's virtual, in letting me come in. They would gather all of the grades together in the auditorium or the cafeteria, and I would come in and we would talk about Feeding Tube Awareness Week and show the Oley video, and we pass out the Feeding Tube Awareness buttons, and just really celebrate and let the kids ask questions about Natalie's tube, when normally they would either be too afraid to ask, or just not get a chance to, and really just help get rid of the stigma or the fear of Natalie or her tube. And a lot of the kids really opened up, and some of the kids would actually be like, you know what, I had a feeding tube when I was a baby, or my cousin had one, or my grandpa had one. So it was surprising to know how many kids had actually heard of or seen or were aware of them. So it was nice to be able to do that with her.
And I'll kind of add that's kind of a blessing, I'd say, and a curse at the same time. That, you know, when we put a shirt on and we're out and about, you know, unless you have a nasal tube, if you have a regular G tube, if you put a shirt on, nobody has to know, or nobody knows that you have a feeding tube. But at the same time, that's kind of a little bit isolating, because you don't realize how many people you're passing in your everyday life that have feeding tubes or that have actually had those before. So you can kind of, I guess, look at that from two different angles.
For sure. And Luke, you and Natalie both kind of touched on how you kind of came into being comfortable talking to your classmates and explaining to them, and, you know, getting up in front of everybody and talking about that and opening this conversation, which I think is really important for people to have an understanding and not be scared. What allowed you to have that shift from feeling uncomfortable and nervous talking about it to being able to explain? Was there something that changed that for you and made you really feel comfortable speaking to others about what you're going through?
So I'll be 100% honest. I was pushed a little bit to do that, but you know, my mother kind of said, you know, let's just get this out in the open, and then you don't have to explain it 500 times over and over and over again. So I was nervous at first to, I guess, come forward and just be open about it. But once I did, it was almost freeing, because then I didn't have to worry about hiding it from so and so. You know, Johnny over here knows that I have one, but Billy over here doesn't know that I have one. And what does that look like when those two start talking? So I think, you know, definitely in hindsight, it was the right decision to make, but it was still a difficult thing to do. But that helps me.
Nancy, can you please repeat the question for Natalie?
Yeah. Is there anything that happened in your life that kind of gave you that shift from feeling nervous to tell other people to just being able to explain it and make jokes about Hot Pockets and all of those things that you were saying about presenting to your class for Feeding Tube Awareness Week? Like, what gave you that boost in confidence?
I feel like a lot of my friends did, because like they would always not make a big deal about it. And one time it was a two-piece, but it covered my tube just enough. And one of my friends had seen it, but I hadn't told her about it yet. And within the next week, she hadn't talked to me again. And I felt really bad because I was like, oh no, I just ruined like a friendship that I could have had for like a long time. And I kept complaining to my friend about it, and she was like, well, if she didn't want to talk to you about it, then she wasn't your friend. And that kind of made me realize, like, you're right. Like, who cares? So a lot of my friends had been saying that to me after I was talking to them about it. And it just gave me a lot of confidence. And also my mom got the tattoo. And I finally got her to wear a bikini for like, what, 5 years? 10 years later.
Never wore one. Yes.
So that also helped me. So there were a lot of things that helped me. And it was also the fact that if someone doesn't like it, they don't have to like it. It doesn't mean I don't.
Yes. So to clarify, if the girl stopped being friends with Natalie because she saw Natalie's tubie and her bathing suit and didn't want to be friends with her anymore, I was like, you know what? I'll get one too. And then she cannot like both of us in our bathing suits with our tubies at the pool. So I brought a spare tubie to the tattoo parlor and I said, give me a tubie, please. And so Natalie and I walked around the pool together all summer with our tubies and our bathing suits. That's where that story came from.
I love that story. And Natalie, I love that you are talking about how you have such a supportive friend group. I think that that's one of the most important things, especially for me growing up in high school with a feeding tube, like knowing that I had friends who were supportive when I was out of school, who would take notes for me when I'd come back, and they'd like make me feel well supported. But I also think that on the other side of that, it, like Luke said, it is really isolating sometimes to not have somebody who gets exactly what you're going through. And I found a lot of support through getting to know other girls with feeding tubes, other people my age who are dealing with the same symptoms as me and the same challenges as me with school and family and friends. So how has resources like the Oley Foundation helped you guys connect with other people with feeding tubes, and why is that community important?
I'll let you guys start this time.
Okay. I have met a lot of friends at Oley that have helped me too. My first time at Oley, I mean, I was like really young. I was like 5, 6 maybe or something.
You were 4.
Oh, I was 4. Okay, so I don't remember that much, but I remember the thing of knowing like you're not alone anymore. Like you can talk to people without them questioning or judging or like trying to get a peek at it. So it was really nice because they give you the support without needing to do anything, because you just know that they're there and that they get it. And it's different from like going from almost no people to like 10, 20 people that even if some of them don't have a feeding tube, they don't ask because they get it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really nice just having that feeling. And I've gone like almost every single year to the Oley conference. And every single year I meet like what, 5, 10, 20 new people. So I've gained a lot of friends from Oley, and they've helped me a lot, and my mom too. I actually see her a lot more happy now that she works for Oley.
Yeah. So our first conference we went to was the Hyannis, Massachusetts conference. And Natalie didn't like to wear her backpack in public. She was 4, and we got into the lobby and she took one look around and she's like, can we go back to our room and can you put my backpack on? She finally realized that there were a lot of other people wearing backpacks, and it was the first place where she'd fit in. And so we did, and she wore it proudly like all week. She wanted her backpack on. So that was really, really, really cool. And that was the first time ever that we had met other people with feeding tubes. Until then, we had thought that we were the only people that weren't in hospitals or anywhere, you know, that were home with tubes. So it was a really great feeling.
So in going through, you know, everything that I've gone through medically, I think that's what really drove me to go into the medical profession. You know, I realized the impact that nurses and doctors could actually have on somebody's life with these different devices. So I did go into nursing school and graduated in 2010. But through all of that, I also got support from a lot of my friends who are nurses. You know, if you tell them, you know, it's just a feeding tube, they get it, they understand. And, you know, it's not a weird thing that they don't see and, you know, all of that. You know, just surrounding myself with people who have been supportive of me and of my needs has been really crucial in my life. And then building upon that too, you know, I try to share now as much as I can with others that I actually have a tube, and you can be normal and have a feeding tube. You know, what is normal? But you know, it doesn't make you you know, into something that you're not. Again, just being open, honest, and just kind of putting that foot forward and trusting that if they are, you know, good people that you want to have in your life, that they will respect that and respect you for it.
Awesome. And while we are talking about this tube feeding community and Oley, I did want to mention that this year's conference, which is June 21st through 25th, will be virtual because of COVID. But that's something that I personally found Oley through their online resources. I was looking for information about how to travel with a feeding tube, which is something that you don't get from your doctors and nurses. You kind of have to seek out that information. And that's one of the reasons why it's been really valuable for me to have friends who have feeding tubes, is I can ask them for advice and ways to get around things like adapting a backpack or going on a trip or learning to like cover my line when I shower. So I'm wondering if you guys, Luke, Natalie, and Mary, have found anything like life hacks that have made your life with a feeding tube easier that you'd like to share with the rest of us?
Oh, I sure do. So I really had an issue. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, I have short bowel, so I can eat during the day. I just don't get the nutrients from that. So I typically use my tube feeding at nighttime while I'm sleeping. So I had an issue, especially when I was younger. I would, as I was sleeping, roll onto my line, kink the line, set the alarm off, and it was waking me up 3 and 4 times a night. And that quickly became, made me really tired and didn't want to do it anymore, and therefore didn't want to do my feeds anymore, and was kind of pushing back at that. So I actually kind of developed a device to help prevent my line from kinking, or at least in that first, you know, couple inches of my extension, because that's where the kinks normally happen. But essentially what it is just a flexible bendy straw that you would normally see in like a sports bottle or a cup or something like that, but totally flexible. And I cut it to the size of my extension, and then I cut it lengthwise. And I think that's the important part. And once you cut it lengthwise, you can then slide that straw on and cover your extension. And you can bend it almost any which way, and it keeps the line on the inside from actually kinking. So I used it for a month. I actually did like a science fair project on it when I was in 7th or 8th grade. And I kept track of how many times it kinked. So without the device, it kinked roughly, you know, 40 times over the course of a month. And with it, I think it was like 2 or 3 times. So I don't know if it was just because that was on there, maybe I was more conscious of it and not rolling onto that, you know, harder plastic straw, or if it actually, you know, was the mechanics of it not kinking. So again, that's something that usually everybody has in their cupboard. That's considered my little G-tube life hack.
All right.
There aren't any like really great things like Luke said, because I am not that creative when it comes to that stuff. But feeding tube pads, there are a lot of ones with like different designs and stuff, and I like using those sometimes because they're just better than the gauze because you can wash them and reuse them.
They're fun.
Yeah, they're fun and they're like decorative. So like sometimes, like when I was younger, I had like Hello Kitty and like flowers and bumblebees. And I mean, now I have just kind of like plain colors and sparkles, but they're still really fun. And I like using those, especially the bamboo ones, because those are really soft.
About that feeding tube.
Oh yeah, I also like decorating my backpacks, my feeding tube backpacks. Like I got these patches that like you iron on, and like they're French fries and ice cream.
Emojis.
Yeah, so there are those which are really nice.
And you plug the pins and put pins.
Yeah, like Nora pins and Oley pins. I put those on too. And like a lot of other stuff. Like I have this puppy pin that I put on.
And one thing that I did order from Etsy to help keep the med port from popping open, it almost was like a taco shape and it snapped closed. And it was made out of felt. And that helped until I accidentally threw them all away. And then I just taped the med port closed to prevent from feeding the bed. Those were pretty cool.
Natalie, I am also a fan of Tubi pads. My favorite one is shaped like a hamburger, and it's also those soft bamboo ones. I do like the food jokes. So Tubi pads were one of the things that I wish I had known about when I first got my feeding tube, because I find them to be so much more comfortable than gauze and makes me feel more confident about it. And I kind of feel that way about a lot of the things that I've learned over the past few years. What are some things that you guys wish that you knew at the beginning of your tube feeding journey? Or what would you tell somebody who's about to get a feeding tube, some things that they should know from the beginning?
Oh, that's kind of a tough question. So tips or tricks or things they should know from the beginning. I think at least the biggest thing for me was just the acceptance of it, and getting over that. Because once I learned to accept my feeding tube and that it was giving me the energy to do the things that I like to do, it became that much easier to actually do it. Again, when I was a teenager, I didn't want to do it. It's not so much the doing it, it was the time it took. In the end of the evening, I just want to go upstairs and go to bed. I don't want to have to make my bag and prime my tubing and set up my pump and hook it up and all that, because that takes time. And it was time I didn't want to spend on a feeding tube. But now, it's something that I do to keep me comfortable, to keep my energy levels up, and to keep me who I am. So I think the best advice I could give is just to learn to accept it, learn to love it. Also to be yourselves. There's not a lot that you can't do with a feeding tube. So if you want to go swimming, you want to go scuba diving, you want to go ride a mountain bike or do those sorts of things, there are ways around that with a feeding tube. We just might have to get a little bit creative in how we do those things. So I always say, don't let the feeding tube define who you are. It's the other way around. You define who you are. The feeding tube is just a little tiny little piece of who you are, but don't make it your life.
So yeah, like Luke said, how like don't let your feeding tube say who you are, because that's just like, then that pretty much ruins your life, because you won't let yourself do things that you would normally do or that you enjoy doing. like I went to MasterChef Junior Camp 2 summers in a row. I was gonna go last summer, but COVID. But it was a lot of fun, and I get to cook and I get to learn a lot of stuff. And even though I'm not a very big eater and I'm a very, very picky eater, I love cooking because I don't know, it's just what I love to do. And I like to do gymnastics and soccer, and I love running. So there are a lot of stuff I like to do. And I used to be like, well, I don't know, I just don't really feel like doing this because I just don't want to have my tube and do it, or I don't want to run with my backpack. But now it's kind of like, I don't know, I just don't let it say who I am. I just do the stuff I want to do. Like I did soccer and I've done gymnastics and I've done t-ball and I've done ballet and I'm going to do track in spring.
Doctor said you can't do the high bars, and she's like, I'm gonna do them. I'll just figure out how to adjust my body so that it doesn't catch my tube. And when she wanted to go away to Gordon Ramsay's MasterChef Junior Camp, they were like, well, we've never had a kid with a feeding tube. It's a week-long camp. And I'm like, well, figure it out. So they had a meeting and they're like, we've never had a kid with her extensive medical issues. And I'm like, well, figure it out. So they brought on more medical personnel and they took her on for 2 summers. And she didn't really try the food, but she ended up winning a couple of their awards for like most promising chef. So yeah, no excuses. If you put your mind to it, you know, you can do things because of your tube, not you can't do it just, you know, because of it.
So I'll kind of add to that too. When I was going into high school, I went to a high school that was huge into football. I mean, every guy in the high school played football and was on the football team. Obviously, with high school football, that is a very contact-heavy sport, which really kind of prevented me from playing just because of my tube. So that was really, really hard thing for me to accept. Because it was, again, something that was making me not normal and what all my friends were doing. But in that, I found other things to enjoy. Honestly, I joined the golf team. It was something else to do. I got to go play golf every day after school for free, you know, and I did that for 4 years. And now I absolutely love it. And I still play golf to this day, whereas I wouldn't be playing full contact football to this day. Right. So you have to kind of take the good with the bad and kind of pull that silver lining out of it.
That's awesome. I love those stories and how Natalie master chef without even tasting the food. That's amazing. And golf is awesome. These are great suggestions. Thank you guys. Oh, go ahead, Mary.
I would like to add the point where Natalie was having a hard time with her tube feeding and she just had enough of it. Don't get mad at me for saying this, Natalie. And she was like, I'm not going to do it anymore. I don't want to. And so her doctor was like, well, you know what? No more tube feeding, no more ballet. You're not getting your calories. You don't get to do your extracurricular activities. And of course, you know, we were the meanest parents in the world and he was the worst doctor in the world. And after a couple months, you know, she really kind of missed doing what she loved. And we got her back into her routine. And she was able to get back into doing her activities again. But she really had to work at it and, you know, make things work for her. Right? Anything else you want to add to that?
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
That's actually a really good transition into our next question. I'm going to go ahead and start taking some questions for our audience. So if you guys have any questions for Mary, Luke, or Natalie, you can go ahead and type them in the chat and we'll be sure to get to them. One of the questions that we got is, how do you get through those times that you're just tired of tube feeding and hit depression? And I know that Mary was just talking about, well, if you can't tube feed, you can't do some of the things you love. But Natalie, what kind of helped you come to that realization and get comfortable tube feeding again? And Luke as well, if you've ever hit a point in your life where you felt that way.
Well, I didn't feel myself anymore because I wasn't able to do the things I loved. So pretty much all I did was sit there and feel sorry for myself. But at the same time, refuse any option that I had to do what I wanted. And there are still some times where I think to myself, like, why don't I just stop? Like, what's the point of it anymore? But I push myself because it's like, well, I know I'll feel that way again. Like, I won't be able to be myself. I won't be happy anymore. I'll just be like this miserable little cranky girl who feels like she can't do anything she wants. Like, can't even have a sleepover with her friends because I'll fall asleep before everyone else does because I'm so tired.
So that's growth hormones.
Yeah, my growth hormone shots. Because I have hormone deficiency. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to stab myself anymore. And when I don't want to do that, I'm like, Mom, stab me.
Right.
Like, get it over with.
But her growth hormone shots won't work if she doesn't have the proper nutrition and calories to.
Yeah, so it's kind of like I need to do that stuff, so I'm not 4 feet 3 inches when I go to college.
That's okay too if you are.
Yeah. So I'm just not like, I don't feel myself when I don't do the things I need to do. So I always feel like, don't stop, like, just keep doing it and you'll still be able to do what you want to do.
So again, add to that. So I had, again, issues in my teenage years where, again, I felt like I had to prove myself and I can do this without a feeding tube. I don't need that. And I think I came over it when I would do my feedings. I had that energy and I had that motivation. I wasn't necessarily as hungry, honestly. But you do still need a support network around you. I think it's totally normal to feel that way when you have a feeding tube, but I think that's why it's important to have people to lift you up and to bring you up as well. My family helped me tremendously when I was growing up. They would even at times, prep my bag for many, many years. Getting that ready for me because I didn't want to do it in the evening. And if I didn't do it, I didn't get it, And then I also experienced some other like health side effects when I would stop doing my tube. More recently, bacterial overgrowth. When I don't do my tube feedings, that bacteria just kind of festers in there. And then I have other issues. I'm in the bathroom every 5 seconds. And so in combination, it's just kind of helped me not only to have those energy stores and to grow and to maintain my weight and to do those sorts of things, but it's kept me from having some of the other issues that would come along if I didn't do my tube feeding. Again, my weight went all the way down to 135 and now I'm back up to 175 and I have energy. So it's definitely tough when you're going through that. You don't see that light at the end of the tunnel, but it's important to keep on keeping on, I guess. And I never really had a lot of, I guess, downtime to where I kind of had a lot of those feelings, honestly. For me, it was the biggest thing was the time. I'd like to think that I don't put a lot of stock in worrying about things because you're using energy for what? So, whether you worry or not, you're potentially going to have the same outcome. Just the combination and the storm of that is kind of what's helped me through.
Natalie and Mary, this one's for you. One of our audience members is asking, what is a tubey pad and how do you use it?
Go ahead, Natalie.
So,
What's it do with it?
it's like this bamboo cotton
Or felt?
or felt. There are different types. It's like this fabric or fuzz thing. And they're round or like they're all different shapes. And they go around your tube, and some of them are like a Velcro or or like a snap one. And they have like these designs or patterns or
What do they do? What's their purpose?
so the stomach acid that comes out around the stoma, it basically absorbs it so it's not burning your skin as much so that it doesn't hurt.
It takes the place of gauze.
Yeah.
Do you want to go get one? So you can hold it up?
Yeah.
Okay, Natalie's gonna go get one to hold it up for you.
Great. And we can also put a picture in the newsletter for you guys to see. While Natalie's going and getting that, I have another question. This one can be for Luke. I know you mentioned that you do a lot of more nighttime feeds, and we have a question from Elizabeth Riddle, who says she has a lot of patients that are, have a difficulty adapting to nocturnal G-tube feeds. And do you have any tips for adjusting to that schedule?
So I think the biggest tips that I could give you for adjusting to that are start slow, and you can gradually then increase, because if you start too high, you're going to fill up, you're going to feel nauseous or even get sick, those sorts of things. So obviously in combination with your doctor, slowly starting titrating those feeds up. I would also caution against eating a large meal right before you put on your 2 feeds. You're just going to be too full. And that stuff isn't gonna make its way through. So that would be my advice. It still takes some getting used to, though. That's still something. But one thing I thought of during the course of this presentation that I wish someone had told me kind of early on is what happens when you get hungry with a feeding tube and your stomach is really, really empty. I don't know if the same thing is true for everybody else out there, but when my stomach does that, it kind of does this contracting sort of thing, which pulls my tube in. It can sometimes be rather painful, and then all of a sudden it pops and comes back out. And that happens a few times over and over again. No one told me about that. And so the easy fix for that is just to put something in there, whether that's 2 feeds or whether that if you can eat food by mouth, and that stops it. So again, that's kind of the reason for the snacks and all that, but that's one of the things my doctors or my nurses never really told me either.
Yeah, I'll also give a suggestion too, if that's okay. Natalie was also a nighttime tube feeder, and we put a wedge under her mattress that we had ordered from online. It helps her to not lie flat, so it helps prevent reflux if you suffer from reflux as well.
So Luke, how like the tube sucks in when you're hungry, and then all of a sudden it just like pops out. And then I'll do that a few times, mine does the same thing. And it almost feels like someone's not pinching like the inside and the outside of your stomach really hard. It feels like they're squeezing it in.
Like your stomach's trying to eat your tube?
Yeah, it feels like your stomach is literally trying to eat your tube.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Here are 2 of the ones I have. This one's like a frog, and I use the snap one. So this one has like the one where it snaps, and then this one has like cactuses and plants on it.
Oh, the babies are around the corner. No.
And this one also has a snap, and it has like the soft parts on the back. so that like it doesn't like itch or scratch your skin when you have it on. It just feels really soft.
Awesome. Thank you, Natalie. Mary, I have a question for you. Michael asks, do any of you have advice for caregivers of loved ones who live on tube feeding in helping to administer care or things to keep in mind?
Let's see, okay, caregivers of loved ones who live on tube feeding. So is this for caregivers who have tube feed, who are in tube feedings? Feeding.
I think it's as your caregiver to someone else who's on tube feeds.
Okay. So I guess my best advice is, and I know you've probably heard this before, is take care of yourself because you can't pour from an empty cup. Meditate. I'm a Reiki master teacher. So I really can't stress how important it is to just really take some time for yourself, even if it's just 2 or 3 minutes, a couple deep breaths, and to relax. Also, if the person you're caring for, just some healing touch, even if it's just a hand on the shoulder or on their hands while caring for them, can really help calm them and de-stress them as well. Especially if it's, you know, caring for them in a way that they might not want to be treated, if they don't want to take their meds, or, you know, they're not being very agreeable, it can really help calm them. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, Michael, in a way that you're hoping for. If it's not, if you want to be more specific in the chat.
Luke and Natalie,
Okay,
do you
great,
guys have,
Michael.
what was that?
I just saw Michael's saying it is helpful. And Michael, if you want to reach out, we can also have another conversation too. I've been happy to have a chat with you.
So we're coming on 4 o'clock. Technically, we're finishing at 4. I feel badly interrupting this wonderful flow of conversation and questions and answers. I think that Luke and Natalie and Mary and Nancy would all be open to answering questions by email, and maybe we can write them up. I'm the editor of the newsletter, so I'm always looking for material to put in the newsletter. So these kinds of questions are important. If they're questions for you, they're probably questions for a lot of our members. So I encourage you all to email them to me. My name is Lisa, and my email address I put in the chat. Wish I had put it on the slide, but it's Metzgel, METZGEL @amc.edu. You can find it on our website. I want to thank Mary and Nancy and Luke and Natalie. It's been a really wonderful conversation. You all did a really great job. Got really nice comments about how inspiring and strong you all are, and how much everybody has appreciated you sharing your stories. I want to encourage everybody on the line, if you're not an Oley member, to join. You can do it at www.oley.org. There's no fee. All of our programs are free for consumers and families. And there are a lot of things available, and hopefully we can do another thing like this again soon. Really appreciate everybody's participation. So with that, I think we'll sign off. Somebody.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Really, really appreciate it. And Nancy, thank you for everything you've done all week for Feeding Tube Awareness Week. Everybody check out our Facebook and Instagram pages. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.